What's up, basketball coaches, players, and fans? Welcome back to the Pass First podcast, where we share our knowledge of the game. My name is Augie Johnston, and I'm here with my partner, Alex Engel, and we hope you're able to take something away from today's episode that will help you in your basketball journey. In today's episode, we're going to be talking all about post play, and more specifically, all about what has happened to the traditional post play that we're used to from maybe the 90s, for example. Nowadays, we know the game has changed, it's different. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. If you're listening on Spotify, please follow us and subscribe there. You can also subscribe on iTunes. And if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe there as well. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into today's episode. All right, everybody, welcome into the episode. We're going to be talking about post play, like I just said. The game has changed, right? The traditional back to the basket post player is not as common as it used to be, although we do see it a lot and a lot of people still use it. But we're talking specifically, we'll talk about all levels today, I guess. High school, we'll dabble with a little bit. We'll talk about college a little bit in the pros. But all right, let's go ahead and dive right in. So, Alex, what would you consider to be traditional post play?
I think a traditional post play, you touched on it a little bit, is that player that can play back to the basket. They're going right to the block. They're looking to score, either going over one shoulder or the other. Maybe they face up a little bit. Maybe a screen and roll type of guy or girl. I think that's kind of a traditional post player. Generally plays inside most of the time. Doesn't spend a lot of time on the perimeter.
Yep, I agree with all that. A couple of things that I'll add to that is, to me, a traditional post player never shoots threes, never dribbles the ball up. We're talking about, you said it in the pre-talk, Patrick Ewing was the one that you dropped. I would say, of course, Shaquille O'Neal, more old school traditional bigs that, run to the rim, stand there with their back to the basket and try to get catches. Okay. So, how has that changed? How has that traditional post play player that we just described changed?
Well, I think you rarely see, I don't say rarely, but it's not as common. I would say it's pretty uncommon to see players really go inside and look to catch around the basket with like a defender on them. I think you see more often, like if post players are getting the ball inside, it's off of like dump down passes. Like the guard penetrates, dumps it down, they can catch and finish. But you don't see a ton of posts that'll catch back to the basket and they can make one or two moves. They can fake one way and go the other, or make a dribble move to the middle, up fake and step through. A lot of that footwork and post touch around the basket is just not there anymore. And I think just not even for the individual player, but for teams don't run the ball through the post very often anymore. Again, I know there's probably going to be someone listening or watching and it's like, well, my team does. And yeah, there are teams out there that do. But generally speaking, it's not that common where I feel like, you said the 90s, but even 10, 15 years ago, most teams would try and get the ball inside first and then kind of work that thing around. And now it's almost the opposite, where it's outside and then the inside kind of is the last option.
Yeah, I remember growing up as a player and hearing the term inside out. We got to play inside out a lot. You definitely don't hear that as much anymore. I guess it's more, like you said, outside in, where, hey, if you get a wide open three, shoot it in transition even, right? And back in the day, that was like taboo. Never shoot a three in transition. Let's play inside out. So, yeah, I think that, and you made a good point. Not only has the player changed, but it's mostly due to, I think, the coaching style. And obviously, like you said, high school, I think maybe it's because there's a lot more old school coaches still coaching in high school or whatever, or it's because the skill set is different. The level of play is different. So I think high school, yeah, you do see more traditional post players, and we can talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But at the NBA level, the game has changed so much to where, we talk about the analytics and stuff in a lot of episodes and how people want to shoot more threes now. So if you're shooting threes, you're not dumping it in. And then a lot more pick and roll stuff, which, yeah, like we talked about, the pick and roll's been around forever, right? But so it is, you can consider that traditional post play. But nowadays it's like everything is a pick and roll, not just like, oh, there's one team in the league that runs a lot of pick and rolls. Like nowadays it's like everything's on ball, screens. So that in itself changed the game, I think. What about shooting? We didn't talk too much about shooting. How has that changed from the past as far as for big men?
Well, I mean, you said a little bit about it earlier, when you talked about how traditional posts don't take threes, and that's really, I think, the difference is now you see post players taking threes, fairly regularly. Obviously, if you don't have the range, then yeah, you can't take that shot. But if you do, then a lot of coaches encourage their posts, or at least allow them, if not encourage them, to take 3-point shots. Um, and I think you didn't see that very often in the past. One, I think just post players didn't work on that. I think it's a mix of things. The skills have changed because you now see post players working on that. And I almost sometimes feel like because they work on shooting from the outside more often, they spend less time working on their post skills around the basket. And since there's only, unless you really are super dedicated and you spend an equal amount of time on both, most players only have so much time in a day. And so if they're spending more time shooting threes, that means they're going to have less skills in the post. So I think that, yeah, that's definitely the main thing there is just more 3-pointers are going up from your big man.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point about what are they spending their time on. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't need my big guy to shoot threes. I'd rather him be in the post rebounding for one of our best shooters, unless he's our best shooter, but for one of our best shooters to shoot threes. But yeah, if my big man was my best shooter, then I would, allow him and encourage him to shoot threes. But there's just something about when your tallest player is shooting it from the outside that you're giving up rebounds, right? I mean, you're giving up great opportunity to get an offensive rebound. So definitely value to keep your post player in the post. Say, hey, work on footwork. Get really good at that, and score when you get the offensive rebounds. I mean, imagine like guys like Hakeem Olajuwon, right, back in the day. If he'd have spent all his time shooting threes instead of working on his post footwork, he wouldn't be better. That's for sure. So,
Mm-hmm.
okay, why do you think it's changed? Why do you think all of a sudden these big guys are allowed to and expected to shoot threes?
Well, I think some of it has to do with the analytics, showing, especially at the NBA level, that threes value wise are better than twos, not just because of obviously the thing that's staring you in the face that three is more than two, but because the percentages are higher, wide open threes, um, the percentage of points you're going to get from each wide open three is better than like a mid range. That's what the analytics say, at least, right? So because of that, players started to shoot more threes, and then coaches and teams started to adopt those ideas and say, okay, yeah, this is what the statistics are saying, so we need to encourage more of that. But then you also had players that have come in and just been able to shoot threes at such a high level, and I think whenever you have elite players doing something at a high level, there's just like trickle down effect where everyone else wants to copy that. And so obviously the first one that comes to mind is a Steph Curry, but Clay Thompson, guy Trey Young. Like, I mean, there's guys that go down the list that all shoot the ball at a really high level from really far out, and they make a ton of threes. And so because of that, over the last 10 years or so, we've kind of seen a trickle down effect with not only in the NBA, but at the college level and high school, and then the youth level, because those kids are now watching, the NBA players as when they're 6, 7, 8 years old, and they're like, oh, I want to be like Steph Curry. And yeah, that's great if you're a guard and you can shoot the ball really well, but sometimes it can be counterproductive if you're a 6'8" post player, and now all you know how to do is shoot threes, and you can't really score on the basket. So I think that is honestly the main reason why. I think it's a mix of analytics and the fact that there have been players that are coming around that just shoot the ball really well, and there's that trickle down effect.
Yeah, and I think if I'm going to look back like at the history of basketball, it's always like, oh, you have a 6'9" guy. Well, you're going to put him in. He's going to play in the post, from youth to whatever, middle school to high school. He's never going to like ever get the coaching to go on the perimeter, and that's just the way it's been traditionally. And that's kind of been the realm for the tall guy, right? You got a tall guy, all right, put him in the post. And the trickle down effect that I see is along the same lines, right? But like, okay, so back then if you watch NBA, who's shooting threes? Okay, it's all the guards. Why? Well, it's not just because the big guys have always been told they have to be in the paint, but the big guys really couldn't shoot at a high rate back then in the NBA, right? I mean, you had guys like maybe like Sam Perkins or like Sabonis or whatever, but I can't think of too many. But then all of a sudden, what happens? European basketball influence. Dirk Nowitzki comes over, 7-footer shooting threes. I think that's an even bigger trickle down effect when all of a sudden you see Kevin Durant, super tall, shooting threes. So now all of a sudden it's like the big man who's in fifth grade is like thinking he's going to be the next, Dirk Nowitzki and not the next, I don't know, Patrick Ewing or something like that. So he's working on that. So, by the time he does get to high school, he can actually do it. And so it's really hard, I think, for a coach to tell somebody that can actually shoot threes, like, hey, you need to stay in the post, play
Hmm.
traditional, back to the basket. You say, oh, wow, my best player is this 6'7" guy in high school who can shoot it, who can get a rebound and bring it up. And so that, changes the way that you're going to coach, and it's more acceptable nowadays because of the whole Europeans coming over and doing it.
Yeah, and I don't think necessarily that it's always a negative thing. Like I know we're kind of framing it in a way that people may think of that we're saying it's bad, that post players are shooting threes, and that's not necessarily the case because one, it's obviously an extra skill that they can have, so there is value to it. But on the flip side, there is a negative side to just taking the biggest kid and throwing them in the post from a young age too, because I've seen plenty of kids where the opposite happens is they're big when they're a little kid, and then by the time they get to middle school and high school, they're not so big anymore, and they cap out at 6'1", and all they have are post skills, and now they can't play. And so I've seen the other way, and I think people have to realize that like it goes both ways, and I think the best thing to do is try and teach skills an all around game, teach them some post footwork, teach them some guard footwork, teach them a little bit of everything. And then as they grow and develop, you can see where their body's at. And now you can kind of try and fine tune. But I mean, we've all remember back in the day, I'm sure you had teammates and I know I did, that was just like, oh yeah, that kid was giant as a kid. And so they just stuck him in the post, and now he's in high school, and that was, he didn't ever really play because he capped out at 6 foot, and it just didn't really work for him.
Yeah, no, yeah, I totally agree with that. And yeah, like on a personal note, like I don't know what I think is better. Like for me, I over the years I've had some traditional posts. I've had some post players that were on the smaller side that were more like guards playing in the post. And I like both, honestly. Like if I think as a coach, you need to recognize what do I have? Oh, I have a 6'7" guy who's a traditional post. Like, okay, run traditional offense, get him the ball inside on the block, and play inside out. Oh, next year I don't have a traditional post. Well, okay, run something where you got that guy bringing the other post player out onto the perimeter so that other people can get to the basket. Whether I don't know what kind of offense that is, but maybe get him at the high post. So yeah, okay. So the game has changed. The post players are shooting threes. They can put it on the deck a lot of times. Would you say this is good for the game?
I think yes and no. So I think I know that doesn't probably help anybody, but it's a little bit of both. So I think yes, in the fact that it makes post players more skilled, and I think it brings the overall skill of the game in general up. Right? I think that's good. Um, but on the flip side, I think it's just diminished post play, and the fact that like bigs cannot score at a high rate inside anymore. And in general, again, we're talking generalities here, compared to 15, 20 years ago, post players do not score inside as well anymore. I think is bad for the game because I think sometimes we become too reliant on three pointers. And I think there's a balance. I think you should have if you can have a post player that can knock down an open shot, that's fine. But you also got to be able to make a basic post move around the basket and score. Um, and I think nowadays, when you look at most, especially at high level traditional posts, like you look at some of the better posts in the league, usually they're guys that like block shots and can rebound. Like that's their job is to block shots, rebound, and catch lobs. Like the prototypical guy that I think of was like a DeAndre Jordan when he first came in, or even like a Rudy Gobert, like those guys where it's like, okay, they're not going to get in the post and give you like a dream shake and go score, right? Like I'm not dumping the ball into them a bunch, but they're going to rebound, block shots, and catch lobs and dunks, easy back buckets around the rim. I just think that you've got to be able to do more than that, and I'm kind of waiting for one day there's going to be like another Shaq that like comes in and is just dominates because there's going to be nobody that can guard him. That's the thing is everybody's so concerned with like, well, who's a traditional post going to guard? It's like, yeah, but who's going to guard a traditional? Like imagine if a Shaq played right now, like who's going to guard him? There's no post player that could guard someone like that. So I'm waiting for that to happen and just dominate for like a decade or two. And then like, we'll maybe see a shift back, the other way, not completely, but like a slight shift, because I just feel like the skill around the basket has just gotten really, really poor. I don't know if you agree with that, but
Yeah, you definitely don't see as many like superstar bigs, that's for sure. What would you consider Joel Embiid?
He's a post. He's not a traditional post because he can. I mean, he steps outside, but he does have post
He has
moves. You know
post
what I
game,
mean?
huh?
Yeah, he
Yeah.
does have post game. I would say he's kind of like a guy that I would say, like if you're gonna hybrid the two different sides, that's who I would want you to be like. You can
Hmm.
step inside, you can dominate, you can step outside. If you got someone that you can pull out away from the basket, good. Then that's like exactly what I want. But I feel like that's rare. Like it's usually not like that. It's usually one or the other.
I feel like for Joel Embiid, his progression, although I did not watch him as he progressed through his whole career or anything, but in starting at youth, but I feel like he is a traditional big that was able to add that 3-pointer to his game and stuff, which I think is the way to do it, not the opposite, right? Don't come out and try to say, "Oh, I'm the big guy first. I'm going to start out here at the 3-point line. I need to develop this. I might not grow. I need to develop this." Like first, you say, "Okay, I'm a post player. Let me get really good at the post. Okay, I got footwork now. How can I get better?" Well, if you had a mid-range jumper, you'd be better. Step out, start working on that, continue to develop. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, and I think it basically comes down to dedication and time and effort. With a lot of the players, I think once they get stuck in that role, they're like they don't want to put the time in. I'm talking not even NBA, just like high school, college guys. They're in that role and they don't really want to spend the time in to develop themselves. And even in the NBA, you see it. Like, I mean, honestly, you look at a guy like Giannis, it's like he still can't shoot a jump shot. How many years has he been in the league now? And it's, yeah, I know it's because he's been dominating with his athleticism, but like at some point, there are times where he looks really bad because he can't hit a jump shot. Or a Ben Simmons, and I know he's not a post, but it's again a 6'9" guy that like can't take a jump shot. So it's not like they don't have access to all the best trainers in the world, and if they just don't, they don't have the time for it. They have plenty of time to do it, but obviously they're not doing something, otherwise their jump shots would improve.
Dude, I'm convinced that guys like that, it's a biomechanic thing, dude. I'm convinced because they're putting in the time. You
You
know
think
they
so?
are. Yes. I'm there's no way they're not at least getting up there, 500 shots 5 days a week, There's no
Yeah.
way. But I feel like just biomechanically there's something like those long arms and all that stuff. But anyways, that's a different discussion.
Hmm.
But okay, so let's kind of zoom in on this topic a little bit and talk about in our own offenses, in our own systems or whatever we do. Like how do you use a post and would you consider it traditional or hybrid or modern?
So I mean, two ways I use our post. Two of our main offenses are we run a pick and roll offense. I would say that's fairly traditional post play. Post set in the screen, roll into the basket. My posts do not pop very often. If they really are open, they can, but most of the time it's hard rolls to the basket. So I would say that's pretty traditional.
Hmm.
We also run a 4 out 1 in, and that's usually more guard oriented, penetrate and dump down. Penetrate and kick, but I do have my post player look to go and post up. So, or I should say, I look to have my 5 post up. So, we did emphasize this last year. Hey, if she's posting up, like get her the ball because I'm comfortable with her going one on one. And I have a couple girls that I rotate in there, and both of them have the ability to score on the basket. My first year, we barely threw the ball in like a traditional post way. This last year we started to do it more, and I think this next year we might even do it a little bit better as I try to emphasize a little more because sometimes, as I was talking about earlier, when teams get 2 3-point happy, like sometimes the same thing happens to us, and I'm like, okay, we can't just chuck threes. Like if you're hitting them, great, but if you're not, you got to let the ball go inside. Even if you don't score every time inside, it just puts pressure on them to like guard that. And if they're it's just natural. Once the ball goes inside, people start turning their heads. They start looking at the ball. You can even you can get a cut to the basket, or then you can get like a really open shot, which maybe you see the ball go through and it opens things up. So I would say we're kind of a hybrid. Like I don't necessarily, if my post players are open on the perimeter, I do allow them to take threes, but they also have the capability of hitting threes, but they don't take many. Like even though I give them that freedom, they rarely take them. I would say I bet you my post players took less than like 10 threes this last year. Like someone to play in the 5. They had opportunities to, and sometimes I'm even yelling at them to take shots because they won't even guard them. I don't want them taking hundreds of threes every year, but if they're taking a handful each, and making the defense at least respect them that they have to come out and guard them, I think it's valuable. So I would say we're kind of hybrid, not completely modern, not completely old school.
Yeah, and you can all, I mean, the pick and roll stuff you said, like, yeah, you can say, I always think of Stockton Malone, right? So
Yeah,
you think it's old school, but it also can be considered modern too, because the
sure.
modern game is a lot of on-ball screens for sure. For us, I would say we are more modern currently with our post player. We like our post player at the high post a lot, short corner. But we do play through our post player a lot. We try to get them catches, and our post player is mostly a good passer in our offense. So yeah, we're dumping the ball into the post or at the high post and then running cutters and stuff. So I guess I would consider that modern. And the same thing, I allow my post player to shoot threes. My post player this previous season was not a traditional post player; it was more of a guard who had to play big. Um, yeah. So all right, let's go ahead and finish it out with. Oh, I guess we already talked about whether we consider it's more traditional or modern. So, is there any other things that you wanted to discuss about post play versus traditional versus modern?
I guess I just my personal preference is I like a player. Obviously, I like a well-rounded player. I like someone that can do a little bit of both. Personally, I'm okay with posts taking threes, and I guess I kind of said this earlier. Um, but just the emphasis for me on this topic is it's okay to have your posts take threes. There's nothing wrong with that. I know that you'll find old school coaches that are like, "That's terrible. They should never do that." But I don't agree. I think it's okay, but they've got to at least have like a minimum level of skill to do it, and I still think there should be more emphasis on scoring around the basket. I think you can be a valuable player by being a fairly traditional post with the ability to step out and at least hit like, a 15 footer, if not a 3-pointer. Um, I do think that that is better because if you only can score around the basket and you face somebody that's just bigger or better defender than you and you can't step away from the basket, it can be tough to score and be real good inside. So that's just my last 2 cents there.
Yeah, and I'm the same with that. I like the whole inside out. I mean, that's what I just kind of talked about: getting the ball into the post, having cutters, kick and kick outs. As if your post player is your best passer, like you'll get a lot of easy shots. Um, but I think you have to definitely at the high school level, right? We don't recruit, so we just kind of get what we get. And if you do have like if I was to all of a sudden get a traditional big um, as one of our best players, and he was going to play a lot, like we would just modify our offense, get him on the block, work on getting post catches off the wing, and letting them, use footwork to score the ball because it's like low hanging fruit, right? If you can dump it in to your big and he can get you a bucket, like just do that every time until all of a sudden you can't get you it and just pass it out. Like there's no foul there. So, okay. Cool. Well, all right. That's all we got for you guys this week. I hope you guys liked today's episode. Again, if you are watching on YouTube, please hit subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, you can subscribe there as well. We're also on iTunes. We also would love to get reviews on iTunes. So if you're listening there, please feel free to give us a review. We come out with a new episode once a week, and we will see you guys in the next episode.
Peace.